This is the Delaware Riverkeeper Network webinar, Fight the Permit, Protect Our River. And we're addressing a few things tonight. So a quick agenda review, we will be putting it into the chat, is we're going to first address the permit for the Gibbstown proposed LNG export terminal. That permit has been requested to be extended by the company building the project, and the Delaware River Basin Commission is considering granting that permit. We're going to talk about what that means and some points that you can make for commenting on it. Second, we're going to take a look at the frac attack that's been launched against the Delaware River watershed. And next, we're going to be looking at the most recent executive order from the Trump administration, which is basically the anti-climate state overreach executive order. Then we're going to be going into questions and answers. So thank you very much for joining tonight. And I'd like to begin by taking a look at the Gibbstown project. So we can put that slide up. So this is the location of the proposed Gibbstown liquefied natural gas export terminal. That's LNG export terminal. And that's on the Delaware River in Gibbstown Township in Gloucester County, New Jersey. The Delaware River Basin Commission, or DRBC, gave its original approval for Dock2, which is the LNG export terminal, to Delaware River Partners, they're an affiliate of New Fortress Energy, in 2019. And that was after the public fiercely fought this massive project. Delaware Riverkeeper Network contested it in court, and in the end, it was approved, but it has not been constructed. Delaware River Partners successfully got an extension in 2022 for 3 more years from DRBC, again, over a lot of public outcry. Many of you were probably involved in that. Now they have applied for yet another 3-year extension, and DRBC is considering this, despite the fact that this project is obsolete and it should be canceled entirely. Next slide, please. So this is the type of huge ship that would be used to transport the LNG down the Delaware River and overseas for sale. But the company has not met the DRBC's requirements for an extension, and we need to tell them that. So we're asking people to submit comments to DRBC explaining why the permit extension must be denied by the agency. We've sent out an action alert with suggested points. You may have gotten that in your email today, and you can make those points. And we're also putting the link to that action alert in the chat tonight. There's a couple easy ways to comment. We only have until this Thursday to comment. That's one of the terrible processes that the DRBC has in place, a very short comment period. So we're trying also to get a public hearing as well. And this can be achieved if 3 of the DRBC commissioners, which are the members of the Delaware River Basin Commission, the governors of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, and also a federal representative from the federal government, from the Army Corps of Engineers. If 3 of them ask for it, then we can get a public hearing. So we're fighting for that as well. We have a petition that's been going around. We've already submitted the first round of names, about 2,300 names to the commissioners calling for this public hearing. We have a sign-on letter that your organization can sign on to. But that link is going into the chat for the petition as well. Please share it. The more people who ask, the more our chances are elevated to get that hearing. And then we can have a higher profile for this. But to briefly sum it up, there are several things that require the DRBC to deny this permit. 1, there are critical federal approvals pending for the project that could change it, and the DRBC's comprehensive plan, which is one of the measures they use, substantially. For instance, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has not ruled on the company's request that FERC declare that the export project does not fall under their jurisdiction. So that decision has been pending for several years. And 1 year ago, FERC checked back with the company, asking them if they still plan to build it, because the terminal would require the transport of LNG from Pennsylvania to the facility by rail car in New Jersey, and that was no longer an option. So DRP, Delaware River Partners, responded they would use trucks instead of rail, and that they were still going to go ahead and build the project, but they were waiting for FERC to rule on whether or not they fell underneath their jurisdiction. So what this project would actually look like, would they be using trucks? Would they wait and try to get rail approval under the Trump administration is unknown. Even the company admits that it could change significantly in their letter that they filed. Also, secondly, the required Army Corps of Engineers approval for the project has expired and DRP's application is under administrative review. So it really is unknown if this approval would be issued or maybe changed substantially. Next slide, please. And so, there's been material change to the approved project, which is also one of the important grounds for denial under the DRBC rules. In this slide, these are maps from Delaware Riverkeeper Network's interactive map that traces the routes that LNG trucks would take to bring LNG from north central PA to New Jersey. And this is on our website. We can share the link afterwards in the follow-up email. They plan to use originally both rail cars and trucks to get it there in order to have enough LNG to meet their projections of what they would be exporting overseas. But rail cars can no longer be used to transport LNG to Gibbstown because the LNG by rail is now prohibited by law, and the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration denied the company's special permit request to allow it. So DRP is stuck with transloading only from trucks to the ship, and that requires hundreds upon hundreds of trucks every single day, and different infrastructure on the site itself. And the truck traffic and the transloading will pollute the air, it threatens spills, and it poses a very high risk of dangerous accidents, which also are all things that are added and emphasized in this changed substantially permit. Next slide, please. The Gibbstown site's condition has changed substantially also due to a currently pending construction of a vast network of underground storage cavern systems to store liquid gases underneath the LNG facility that they would build. A New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection draft permit for these proposed caverns is currently out for public review right now. It would be the largest cavern system in the state, and it also compounds the site's unacceptable dangers and also its pollution potential. By the way, we're going to hold a Zoom webinar on May 7th to explain everything, all the ins and outs of this cavern permit and how you can comment on it. There is a public hearing set for May 14th, and also a comment period goes to June 16th. We'll put that into the follow-up email. So additionally, DRP, Delaware River Partners, has not diligently pursued the project, which is required by DRBC if they're going to be eligible for an extension. And there's a few examples of how they have not done that. First, they say in their letter that they submitted that due to market conditions and other factors, quote unquote, construction has been delayed. So they could have constructed the project, but intentionally delayed it as their own personal investment decision. The DRBC should deny based just on that. That is not grounds for an extension. There's also a ledger they submitted, but they don't give enough detail about how they spent this money that they claim they spent on the LNG project. And also the basic fact that the liquefaction plant that was supposed to be built in Wyalusing Township in Bradford County, PA, 4 years ago, that would be to make the LNG to transport down to Gibbstown, it's not been constructed. And all the Pennsylvania DEP permits have expired. So there's no information available about where the company would even get the LNG to export from the proposed Gibbstown terminal. So that demonstrates a lack of project viability and also a lack of diligence by the company. Next slide, please. This project is extremely dangerous. It's a liability for the regional communities and for the environment, for the Delaware River and watershed, and it has no public benefits. It's only the desire of Delaware River Partners and New Fortress Energy to make money at the public's expense. Many of us have fought this project for the last 6 years, so we're familiar, you may be familiar with the damages it would cause. But quickly, here are some of the major issues highlighted, focusing primarily on the Gibbstown dock site because that's what this permit is for. And these points will be in the action alert that you're going to see. So the site is still contaminated by DuPont's munitions manufacturing dating back over 100 years when they manufactured munitions there. Enormous LNG ships, larger than any ship that comes this far up the Delaware River today, would be used at a huge wharf built out into the Delaware River. Each ship would hold the equivalent of the explosive energy of 67 Hiroshima bombs. So that threatens New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware communities and all the infrastructure associated, but the people who live there, should there be a release and an accident. And these ships would also strike and potentially kill critically endangered species, such as the Delaware River's unique Atlantic sturgeon ecotype. The operation of the facility itself presents a severe public safety threat due to the hundreds and hundreds of LNG tankers that would travel about 200 miles from Wyalusing Township, Bradford County, down to the LNG plant where across the Commodore Barry Bridge and into Gloucester County, New Jersey. These trucks would idle at the Gibbstown site. They would pose danger as the LNG is transloaded into the ships, one of the most dangerous parts of the entire LNG life cycle. And LNG is a hazardous liquid. It's highly flammable and explosive and can cause unprecedented catastrophe, including inextinguishable fire. You have to let it just burn out for about a mile, and an explosion that would impact the entire region, not just Gibbstown, New Jersey, but all of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia airport, Chester, all of the region in New Jersey, and even the state of Delaware, which is only 6 miles away. So next slide, the last slide. And as many of you know, liquefied natural gas is a bad idea for a multitude of reasons. And many of us have been working against the export of LNG overseas for these reasons. But just quickly to tick through them, LNG exports mean more pollution for communities. And that's especially true for environmental justice communities that would be saddled with more air and water pollution, harming public health and shortening lives. And the devastating pollution occurs, however, at every single step of the cradle to grave process of LNG, from where the fossil gas is fracked and extracted, the transportation, the pipelines, where it's stored, as it's transloaded, when it's being shipped, and finally, when it's used as an energy source when it gets to its destination overseas. And I think, probably the other thing that we all have talked about and thought about is that LNG exports, including the proposed Gibbstown and Wyalusing export project, will make the climate crisis worse by pumping out greenhouse gases at the moment when we urgently need to reduce these emissions to avoid climate catastrophe. We need to develop truly clean and renewable energy sources, and these will be displaced by LNG. Finally, LNG is an economic nightmare, and its moment as economically viable has passed. There's already a worldwide glut of LNG that will engender economic instability as demand wanes and nations turn to clean, sustainable, affordable, and homegrown greenhouse gas-free energy sources. And LNG exports also drive up the price of gas for domestic users, including manufacturing and electric utility costs, harming those users who can least afford high heating bills. So that's the final whammy for the people who live here. So that's a quick run through of the points. As I said, you'll be getting that in writing. You may have already gotten the email. Our action alert details these points, and we have references that you can look at. And there's a couple easy ways to submit your comment. Now, I'm going to turn this over to Annika Van Rossum. She's our Advocacy and Policy Coordinator, and she's going to be discussing the frack attack on the Delaware River watershed. Annika?
Thanks, Tracy. Hi, folks. So some of you, this might be new information. Some of you might have been there throughout this fight. So apologies for anyone getting a refresher. But for folks who don't know, and I'll get into a little bit specifics, way back in 2010, the Delaware River Basin Commission voted voted for a moratorium on fracking. And for folks who don't know what a moratorium is, essentially a moratorium is a suspension of an activity or a law until consideration of what that activity brings, on what things need to be put in place. A myriad of factors are considered, and then that moratorium would be lifted, and there would be either there would be a change, whether that would mean the activity going through or not allowing the activity going through. So that's just for folks who don't know. So then in 2010 was when there was a unanimous vote for this moratorium on gas drilling, fracking, and such in the Delaware River Basin. And then we saw in 2011, there were some proposed regulations, and there was a record-breaking 69,000 public comments that were submitted. I'm sure many people on this webinar were part of that effort. And those comments broke the record that had not been done ever before in the history. And so those comments also said that those proposed rules and those proposed regs needed to be scrapped. They were too weak, they were too narrow. Folks were calling for a comprehensive environmental impact analysis of what gas development would end up doing to the watershed. So essentially, those rules then went back to the drawing board. And then again, we saw in 2017 that the alarm bells were going again, that there were going to be regulations, and that the moratorium getting lifted could happen again. And still, folks kept up the public pressure, which was so essential at this time, whether it was attending protests, whether it was going to the DRBC hearings and meetings, it was submitting comments, it was doing public speaking, it was many folks at different organizations doing educational campaigns to educate the public and each other year after year after year. And this became, nearly about a decade of effort. And so the public pressure was key to every time bad rules came and bad regulations came, getting them sent back to the drawing board. So that was really important, and that will kind of play into what we're going to talk about later. And so in 2019, then there was a slow rollout where we saw the governors from New Jersey, from Pennsylvania, and from Delaware starting to say that they were going to vote in favor of a ban on fracking. And so that was a slow effort. But it did come out. And then finally in 2021, a ban on fracking was unanimously voted on in the Delaware River Basin. But this, however, just so folks know, this did not ban all fracking related activities. So importing outside frack wastewater or using basin water outside for fracking is still a thing, and that is still a problem. So the out of this formed the Delaware River Frack Ban and Climate Action Coalition, and so that is different organizations of what Delaware River Keeper Network is a part of. And so we continue the effort to advocate for a full ban on fracking in the Delaware River Basin, which would include these harmful activities, as well as making sure that there is the DRBC is taking good action on climate and considering those. So you can learn a lot about those efforts by seeing what we're doing, which is a little update for you guys. So if we can go to the next slide. So we have a ban on fracking, but we have recently learned that that is likely a target, as I'm sure folks aren't surprised when we started seeing the news about drill baby drill. It certainly wouldn't be surprising to see a push for fracking, but we have now had a little bit more clear evidence about that targeting. So back in the beginning of March, Representative Rob Bresnahan Jr. and had a roundtable, and EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin was there along with other officials. You can look up who else was there. And one news article did report that those described in attendance were local pro-fracking industry figures, advocates, and elected officials. The Delaware River frack ban and the ban on fracking was discussed at this meeting. It was a topic of conversation. Several people did bring it up. As far as we know, environmentalists were not invited to this meeting. We certainly weren't aware of it until after it happened. The DRBC, as well as we are aware, was not invited to this meeting to be a part of that discussion. So not much of a roundtable of different thoughts and opinions on this. So that is what happened in early March and is reported on. You can find a lot of news articles about it if you're interested in learning more about what was said and what was happening. And then at a later town hall, this was also kind of confirmed because Representative Bresnahan did make remarks again about lifting the ban, about reining in control on DRBC. So there was even more discussion about that later. And this is just a quote from a news article that when Representative Bresnahan was talking about the benefits of fracking, he's quoted as saying, "You're talking about ways that we could fund schools and parks and pave roads and critical infrastructure systems," said Bresnahan. "This would be an incredible opportunity to do that in terms of allowing fracking." And as many folks here know, and if you don't know, please, please, please go read some more. Fracking costs significant amounts of money when you have to repair the roads that these massive trucks are going on. The healthcare costs from the myriad of issues that we have seen folks get when they live near fracking pads, wells, industry, including water contamination. The cleanups that do come along with this industry, the emergency services that are required when you have fracking in your area, because fracking is an industry that is not without inherent dangers. And so we constantly see money being spent on that. So there's a lot out there to disprove this idea that there's some economic big gain when you have fracking come in. And there are also studies that show that the counties that do have fracking on Western Pennsylvania actually are not better off when they have it. So again, you can look that all up, but it's very interesting. And so part of this concern too is it's very clear that the frack ban is going to be a target, we think, coming up from different elected officials and probably from the federal administration. And part of this too is talking about that this energy is going to be harnessed and could be used for AI and data centers, and that Pennsylvania could be a big leader and a big energy provider for that if fracking was allowed. So there's all sorts of plans as to what would be used if the frack ban were lifted. So if we can go to the next slide. So, but what does that all mean? Now, I think the way we're seeing things happen, it kind of is measuring, well, what can be quickly overturned with a pen? Where can there be intervening? All that stuff. So for folks who don't have have not been involved in the DRBC and don't have a huge background on it, I just wanted to give a little history and to kind of talk about the reality of lifting the frack ban. So in 1961, President Kennedy and the 4 watershed state governors, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware, agreed and signed what's known as the Delaware River Basin Compact, which then created the Delaware River Basin Commission as we know it today. And so the Delaware River Basin Commission is represented by the governors of each state, those are known as the commissioners, as well as a representative from the Army Corps of Engineers who represents the federal government. So they're all known as the commissioners. Those are 5 voting members. So you won't always also see, you don't see the governors actually at these meetings. They usually appoint, there's one alternate and then there's another, there can be a second alternate who come in, and they're usually members of their staff, usually from high ranking environmental organizations or different positions who do show up. And also too, so the Army Corps of Engineers, that would be the representative for the federal government. So would have represented Joe Biden, would have represented Donald Trump. So that's who shows up for them. So that's kind of how it works. They show up, they have different meetings. And for folks to kind of understand why this was so important and why it's so valuable is before the DRBC, the Delaware River is 330 miles of undammed river that flows all the way from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania down to Delaware. And so before that, you had 43 state agencies, 14 interstate agencies, and 19 federal agencies, all kind of trying to control this river and do their state and do the federal and do all these different pieces. So it gets kind of messy. And so while we still have this era where, of course, each state is maintaining their functions, of course, there's different levels of federal oversight and such. This is kind of more of a centralized body that can help make those decisions for the entire basin. That's really important when you have this water body that connects so many states and connects 17 million people for drinking water. And so again, for folks who don't know, the DRBC is empowered to allocate water supply, protect water quality, regulate water withdrawals and discharges, plan for the needs of the river and of recreation. They have a role to play in different projects that are proposed along the basin, which is why we're talking about this LNG export facility. And put simply, they ensure adequate and sustainable water supply, as well as clean and healthy water resources. So just to make clear, the federal government has a voice in the DRBC. They do have a voting voice. They are a member of it, but they do not have a veto power, and they cannot disregard any decisions that are made by those other 4 state commissioners. Decisions are usually made via majority vote, or in some circumstances, a unanimous vote, and you can read all about that on the website. But there is no veto power. The federal government cannot just go in and turn it over. they're not under federal oversight. So this is not something that Donald Trump can just, or a president can just swift away with a pen. And so Bresnahan, we wanted to talk about this because the Bresnahan meeting kind of gave the impression that this could just be overturned in a different way. And so that is not what would happen. I really want to explain that to folks and really empower folks to understand that it's not something that can just be done without a process. And for folks again here who haven't been involved, I really encourage you. The DRBC is a way that you can make your voice heard, and it may not seem like it, but I just put a link to their FAQ website where you can learn how to sign up for the quarterly public hearings, where you can attend the business meetings, where you can see what they're talking about, see what they're deciding on, and also either provide written public comment or speak during the public comment sections. And Tracy has told you all too, this really great way that you can get involved. And that's part of this effort. Is this is a really powerful way for you to directly have your voice heard. And that's why we're having this tonight. And you do have an influence on really big decision makers. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Hector Brandt, who is the Energy Fellow at Delaware Riverkeeper Network.
Thank you, Annika. I'd like to take a moment of your time to just talk about one thing that Tracy brought up earlier and Annika referenced here briefly. It's one of the most recent executive orders enacted on April 8th, and it's called Protecting American Energy from State Overreach. To just kind of briefly go into the details, this executive order directs the Justice Department to take a two-pronged approach on the development of domestic energy. Prong one says that they have to identify any laws that are state laws or local laws that interfere with domestic energy development, and the prong two that are or may be unconstitutional, preempted by federal law, or otherwise unenforceable. So one of the first things you'll notice is that the first prong mentions domestic energy sources. The key question here is which domestic energy sources are prioritized. The ones that are prioritized are oil, natural gas, coal, hydropower, geothermal, biofuel, critical minerals, and nuclear energy. The Attorney General must identify state laws and local laws, regulations, causes of action, and policies that burden the development of siting, production, or use of those domestic energy sources. And those altogether are referred to as the state laws. But how does the state law allegedly burden energy development? This can be thought of in a number of different ways, but those include excessively fining energy producers, creating regulatory programs such as cap and trade programs, which limit production by limiting emissions, or again, by excessively complex and time-consuming permitting processes. After the DOJ identifies the laws which interfere with domestic energy production, the DOJ has to identify which of those laws are, again, either unconstitutional, preempted by federal law, or are otherwise unenforceable. That last prong really gives it a little bit of wiggle room, which can make it unpredictable, but it does target laws which address climate change, environmental, social, and governance initiatives. Those are also called ESG initiatives, environmental justice, or those which mention carbon or greenhouse gas emissions. The DOJ is ordered to take all appropriate action, and that's a pretty broad statement, to stop enforcement of those identified state laws and report on compliance within 60 days. And that works out to be June 7th. So the DOJ has to do all that stuff and then report back to the president on June 7th. How will all of this play out? The Attorney General is likely to pursue lawsuits on the basis of regulating business between states, because that's an area where the federal government can get involved, and also on federal preemption, meaning that federal law can trump state law. But because we saw there's some wiggle room in here, other legal theories can also come into play. As we have recently seen, the Justice Department can also use non-litigation tools, such as withholding federal funding from states that refuse to abandon such laws. However, there are limits to that power. The anti-commandeering provisions of the Constitution prohibit the federal government from coercing states to give up those powers which are reserved for the states. But it could be the case that the federal government overplays its hand in trying to force states to comply using those non-litigation strategies, in which case individual states could sue and the issue winds up back in court in the end. What legal actions are likely to be targeted in our watershed? The ones that come to mind are the Pennsylvania and New York Green Amendments. Those could be targeted. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, otherwise known as RGGI, and Pennsylvania's Climate Emissions Reductions Act, called PACER. Also, any environmental justice policy throughout the watershed, and that includes at the state level, but also any local policies or ordinances. And another one is maybe like the New York and the DRBC fracking bans, such as Annika just mentioned. One significant way that this could limit organizations' ability to fight back is by limiting certain causes of action. And those are ways you can get into court, essentially. If there are less laws through which organizations can sue, then there will be less opportunities to push back on harmful projects. But there's also a possibility of reduced public input opportunities, since those could be seen as unduly burdening energy development. And as we have seen in the past, public input is really, really important. So that could make it more difficult for organizations to flex that muscle, which is their network, and apply pressure through the public. And that's all I have, Maya.
So for those of you who don't know, hopefully all of you do, my name's Maya Van Rossum. I'm the Delaware Riverkeeper and leader of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. And I'm really joining today. You've got this amazing information and leadership and engagement from Tracy, Annika, and Hector. But I really just wanted to step in with a strong message of solidarity, right? The Delaware Riverkeeper Network has always stood strong to protect our beautiful Delaware River, all of the communities that live within the watershed, human communities and non-human communities, and work to protect every square inch of this watershed from the devastating consequences of fossil fuel extraction, pipelines, LNG exports, compressor stations, the use of fossil fuels for hydrogen hubs, and so much more. And standing with all of you, working with all of you, as you have heard this evening, we have accomplished amazing things, from the frack ban to staving off Gibbstown and so much more. But unfortunately, while we have accomplished all of these successes by advocating together and working together and pursuing successful litigation, the threats and challenges we face are continuing and, in fact, even growing. And a perfect example of that is the current executive order, or one of the executive orders that Hector just spoke about this evening. And so I'm really just here to chime in to express gratitude to all of you for showing up tonight, express gratitude for all of you for standing with the Delaware Riverkeeper Network so we all could work together to protect our communities, protect our watershed, and protect future generations, and to let you know that the Delaware Riverkeeper Network will not back down, will not be shy moving forward, and we will continue to stand strong and help fight the fight to protect our beautiful Delaware River and all of its communities from all of the challenges and threats that we face, from fossil fuels to development to beyond. And we are not going to be kowtowed by threats from governmental entities. So I just wanted to assure you all of that. And with that, we're going to dive into Q&A.
Thanks, Maya. So Annika, I think you're trying to pull some questions out of the Q&A, right?
Yes, I have a bunch already. So I feel like anybody could answer these, so I will try to direct them, but please, everybody chime in. So the first one, I think, Hector or Tracy, I think either of you, can Trump's energy emergency force the Dock2 and the fracking of Wayne County? So I think, can it force the Dock2 that we're talking about tonight? And if you want to talk about Wayne County.
Well, no. I mean, the EO is an executive order, and as Hector explained, it doesn't have the force of law itself. That actually has to be carried out through some sort of initiative. So the Delaware River Basin Commission, as Annika explained, has 5 members. One of them is a federal member, but the governors of the 4 states are the other 4 members, and any action taken regarding LNG, regarding fracking throughout the Delaware River watershed. It's not just Wayne County they're talking about. It's all of the Marcellus Shale and Utica Shale in the Delaware River watershed, which is about 1/3 of the watershed. That would all be subject to a vote by the Delaware River Basin Commission. Not only was a vote taken to enact that ban, but it was then carved in stone in what's called their comprehensive plan through several layers of process. So there would be a big fight, and we would be there fighting to make sure that the federal government would not, with their one vote, push around the 4 governors of the other states and allow fracking to happen or force an LNG approval of this permit if the other commissioners do not want it to be granted. We have another question, Annika?
Another question is, how much time do we have to convince the Delaware River Basin to hold a hearing?
Well, that's a good question. It's not explicit in the rules. So there's no timeline that they say they have to decide by a certain time. But we have a sign-on letter that's going in tomorrow. Organizations throughout the entire region and outside of the region who care about the watershed are signing this letter. If you have an organization that wants to sign the letter, please send an email to, and Annika, maybe you can put both of our emails in the chat. Send us an email directly and we'll share that letter with you. It's going in tomorrow morning, and then we'll be resubmitting it as more groups sign on. But we are trying now to reach out to the commissioners to convince them, 3 of them, to vote for a hearing. That the rules say that they can just ask for it in writing, but they also say they can vote for it. So there is no scheduled meeting of the Delaware River Basin Commission where the commissioners will be there and vote until June 11th. So while that's not explicitly said in the rules, the next time theoretically that they would be together and could actually vote for a hearing would be June 11th. So we're not going to stop advocating for a public hearing on Thursday, which is when the written public comment ends. We are going to continue. We have a petition, and that link is in the chat. We also have it going out, and we'll be sending it in the follow-up with the recording email that you get. But that petition is very important. We've already submitted 2,300 signatures. More will be submitted as we go along, and we will be saying we want a public hearing. And those 2,300 signatures all happened in just a matter of a couple of days. So we believe that we have a really strong movement going to tell these commissioners that we want 3 of them to say they want a hearing.
Okay. Another question is just wondering if there has been folks are wondering if there has been a look at the cumulative impacts this project would have on the river, traffic hazards from in the area. So if there's any look at cumulative impacts on what this project is going to do.
Well, I'll just say that we don't feel there's been a comprehensive enough analysis. As a matter of fact, there have been a bunch of permits, a whole list of permits that have been given by state and federal agencies, but we feel we never got a complete comprehensive analysis. One of the reasons that we didn't is because the Army Corps of Engineers, which is the lead federal agency that did the review of the LNG proposed Gibbstown project, never did an EIS, and they really messed up the National Environmental Policy Act process. So we appealed that permit, and that is still pending, that appeal. We also feel that the DRBC did not do a good enough job originally. We went all the way to the Supreme Court to try to ask for that approval to be overturned, and we lost. We also appealed every single other permit that was given for this project from New Jersey DEP, other agencies, and all of them we tried to get into the Supreme Court unsuccessfully. So we feel that there needs to be a much more comprehensive analysis done. And one of the things that we think should happen is that there be a federal analysis that looks fully at all of the environmental and public health impacts.
And I think another question we were getting is folks are wondering what the power would be behind a DRBC hearing. What would that mean for this project, and what would it mean for folks who are concerned about this project? So what would it mean if a DRBC hearing was held on the Gibbstown terminal?
It wouldn't guarantee anything, but what it would do is it would raise the profile of this project. And I think what we're always struggling to do in all of our environmental fights is get the attention that a project or a proposal needs in order for people to understand how important it is and how it's going to impact their lives. And really, in order to do that, you need to just expose it and expose it. And a better way to get exposure is to have a public hearing where people can come out and speak and say what they think. The other thing that's really important about a public hearing is it gives the public the opportunity to comment. And right now, this decision is going to be made by the executive director of the Delaware River Basin Commission. And the last time they gave the approval, we wouldn't have even known about it if Delaware Riverkeeper Network had not found out through a Freedom of Information Act request. At least the public and along with DRN fought to have that rule changed, and at least they required that it be publicly noticed when the permit was up for an extension. And that's why we have this opportunity to have a public hearing. These commissioners actually voted in the affirmative. They approved and they wanted the rules changed to allow for the opportunity for a public comment. So we have a lot of interest here. This is a tremendously impactful project. It's going to affect people's lives indelibly. We have a right to say something about it. So this is going to give people the right to actually speak out and bring the issues they think would impress the commissioners and show them why that it should not be approved. So that's another very important reason, the transparency of government and public access to those who are making these decisions. But it could actually turn around the project. It could turn out that the commissioners hear what people say at this hearing and say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we have a lot of good references and a lot of good information that we're sharing and that people have brought to the table over the last 6 years in fighting this project. We just need to make sure the commissioners hear us.
Yeah, and just to add, I think that if the commissioners do grant a hearing, I think it'll be a signal, right? At the Delaware Riverkeeper Network with all of you, we have, as Tracy said, we have fought and struggled and urged time and time and time again for the commissioners to weigh in and to say no to this project, to use their power. And when they've had the opportunity, they've actually evaded the obligation and the opportunity to hear from the public and to engage more thoughtfully in this project. And so if they say that they want a public hearing and to create the opportunity for all of you and all of us to come forth together and be heard, it does. We think that it's a signal that the commissioners themselves are, going to be paying greater attention and do want to hear what the public has to say. And as Tracy said, could be positioning themselves to take all of that good public comment and actually render a decision that could turn this whole situation around and stop this project.
Great. Another question we have is folks are just wondering, kind of talking about with this project, the dangers, the differences, the risks, all the kind of info that has to go along with LNG being shipped via truck versus rail. And so what does that mean, and what do we know about that?
Right. Yeah, we have a tremendous amount of information developed on our website about that. And we have had comments that we've submitted to the various agencies regarding shipping by rail or transporting LNG by rail, LNG by truck, and LNG by ship. And there's that body of evidence is on Delaware Riverkeeper Network's website, but it's also, even if you Google it, there's a lot more information now because there has been so much controversy about the glut of LNG and all the projects that are being built mainly along the Gulf Coast for exporting LNG overseas, and how the danger has been exposed to the communities there over and over again. And so there's a lot actually more information available today than there was even, when we started the fight against the Gibbstown facility. So yes, we have a tremendous amount of information there, and some of it is hyperlinked in the suggested comments that we have in our action alert. But of course, it's way too much information to put on a webinar, and we'd be certainly happy to share. If you look at it and say, "Gee, this is interesting. I'd like to know more here." Like for instance, our comment to the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Administration. It's, dozens of pages long and has a tremendous amount of information about what's wrong with rail and what's wrong with truck transport of LNG, as an example.
Another question folks have is, is the Gibbstown facility, is the LNG being shipped to Gibbstown still exclusively for export? Folks are wondering if that means that none of it is available for American energy.
It's an interesting question because yes, it would only be for export because the way they have it set up, the trucks pull into the site, they hook up to a pipe, and the pipe goes to the ship. However, in defense of their project, back when they were discussing New Fortress Energy and Delaware River Partners have been trying to get FERC to say, oh, this project doesn't fall under their jurisdiction. And one of the arguments they made is that, oh, well, we might fill a ship and send it somewhere domestic to be used domestically, which is pretty ridiculous when you think about it. But that was one of their arguments. Oh, well, we could fill a ship and we could send it to, I don't know, Boston. Or yeah, it's pretty absurd argument, and we did say that in our comment back. But that is one of the things they said. But truthfully, the way they have the infrastructure set up, it would have to go on ships. They don't have any storage of LNG at the Gibbstown site.
And then another question is, I think there's some folks think that this project, that Governor Murphy had already canceled this project. So is that a different project, or is this a totally new project?
This is not a new project. Governor Murphy never canceled this project. The only thing Governor Murphy did, which was very strange, frankly, is when the DRBC voted to extend the permit back in 2022, Governor Murphy, along with the other governors, except for New York, who abstained and actually tried to have a resolution not to have it move ahead, except for New York, the other 3 states in the federal government approved the extension. And after Governor Murphy voted for that, he then issued a press release to say, oh, he was going to do everything he could to try to stop LNG from being exported from Gibbstown. It was a non-starter. Nobody could even believe that he was sincerely saying that after hours before he voted for the project. So Governor Murphy's Department of Environmental Protection have fought us in court. They've defended their decision to allow the permit to move ahead, and they've done everything they possibly could to grease the wheels for this project. Governor Murphy has not been our friend on LNG. Now, I have to say that Governor Murphy could still be our friend on LNG by voting for a hearing and then voting against the project. So we don't count any of the governors out, especially today when the stakes are so high, when we have so much pressure coming to us from the federal level to approve oil and gas facilities. Maybe all the states are going to get, really strong and fight back and say no, and we don't want more burdens for our communities.
And just for clarification, right, a reminder to everybody, while other people actually show up to cast the vote as commissioner, the actual commissioners are the governors. So when New Jersey cast its vote for the extension, when it casts its vote in any way to advance this project or any other bad projects, that vote is the governor.
So another, I lost my spot. Another kind of on that note going is one of the questions as well, is what leverage does the EPA administrator have to force dangerous fossil fuel projects such as this one? And I will just harken back to mine that EPA is not a voting member on the DRBC. So as far as the DRBC goes, they are not involved in that. But for others who want to chime in on that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe Hector or Maya might want to chime in.
Hector, I'll let you have the opportunity first.
Can you repeat the question from Yannicka?
What leverage does the EPA administrator have to force dangerous fossil fuel projects?
Well, he's got a couple of levers. One of them is going to be the energy emergency, because that's kind of greasing the wheels. And Tracy has mentioned how this can happen in a couple of different ways, but it activates emergency powers for federal government that can make them stronger. And I think, in my mind, one of the ways that they can apply pressure is the threat of withholding federal funds. We mentioned earlier there are limits to that, but that's really, really scary to a lot of states. And there's already a lot of organizations that are trying to make their way through that, but it's a big threat and it can be very powerful.
And just to add, right, there's the every project is unique and different. And, you know, as you've heard with regards to Gibbstown, as you heard with regards to the frac ban, right? Tend to be multiple layers of decision making. And so it's not unilaterally in the hands of a single agency like the Environmental Protection Agency to flag a project and to force it through. Now, the federal government as a whole, as Hector said, they can, you know, try to apply pressure in a variety of different ways, but it is not uncommon, right, that the states have a body of power and authority as well. For example, in the context of fracked gas pipelines, where the federal government has a tremendous amount of power, where the Natural Gas Act preempted local and state authority when it applies to those kinds of projects, still through the Federal Clean Water Act, for example, state governments could deny a critical Clean Water Act approval called 401 certification that can and has in fact been utilized to stop projects. For Gibbstown, a key lever of power has been the Delaware River Basin Commission, and the federal government cannot and does not override the Basin Commission because of how that entity, it's a very unique legal body. And so the federal government cannot just swoop in and usurp its authority the way it can perhaps in other circumstances. So I think the real key is every time there's a fossil fuel project that's coming forth, right, pay attention to the Delaware Riverkeeper Network or other organizations that are taking on that battle and garner from them the knowledge on what are the layers of opportunity to stop the project at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, and at the regional level through a body like the Delaware River Basin Commission, and get involved in every single facet of opportunity. This has to be, you know, we have learned this at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network time and time again. You cannot be all in on one strategy because you never know how it's going to play out. It really has to be all of us together pressing and pushing every argument, even if they seem like they're at odds with one another, right? Where you're arguing this point over here and something a little bit over here that maybe they seem at odds. You got to be all in, man, because the government is. And the fossil fuel industry is. And you'd be amazed, just like Tracy just said, right? Governor Murphy acts one way during the day to vote yes to advance a project and then claims that he has voted no to advance that project. That kind of thing happens repeatedly and actually happens in decision-making contexts. So we, the people, have to be involved at every level. And the only way to know, you know, what are all the facets of opportunity available for you to get involved in is for you to, you know, partner up with whatever organization or organizations are taking the lead or banding together to take on a battle, and they will, you know, bring forth the kind of information about what are all the opportunities for the government to say yes or for the government to say no.
So if folks want, I have one more final question I think is good to wrap this up with, and I know we have a final slide. But folks are wondering if Gibbstown is in an environmental justice area.
Gibbstown is within 3 miles of what is mapped as an environmental justice area by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection under their environmental justice law. And there are other census blocks that are within the distance that may actually trigger that law. It's one of the issues that are very important should there be a state permit that would come up. Paulsboro is the town that's the closest. That is an environmental justice community, just so you know. It's only about 2.5 miles away. Also would like to mention there are environmental justice communities across the river on the Pennsylvania side. We have Philadelphia and we have Chester, and we also have census blocks outside of those communities that are environmental justice communities. And they are at risk too, because the river is only a 1.25 miles wide there. So any terrible accident that would happen with a ship or at the facility would affect Chester. It would affect Philadelphia Airport, Eastwick area, Tinicum Township, all of that area, as well as the New Jersey side of South Jersey would be affected. And as I mentioned earlier, Delaware is only 6 miles away, and the ships would course right past, um, go south past Chester, then they go all the way down along the coastal zone of Delaware. And by the way, Delaware has banned LNG terminals because they think the public safety issues are too great. That ban has been in place since the late 1970s. So they don't want these ships, and yet they would be subject to them. So the danger to environmental justice communities and highly densely populated areas is very great from this facility. And if they were to build the LNG plant they want to build in Chester, it would make that entire area, a triple whammy. We're talking about sacrifice zone big time.
Great. Well, there's still lots of questions and it's very much appreciated, but we are at our time. And so I will let Tracy and Maya and Hector and everybody sign us off and tell folks what they need to know.
Okay, great. Well, maybe Peter can put the last slide up just to remind everybody that we have, these action items. They are in the chat because I know it is hard to actually, copy something off a slide. So you won't be able to do that. But just remember, there's two main things that we need to have done. One is to submit a written comment, and the comment period closes at 5 p.m. on Thursday. So let's get them in. We have a really easy way that Karen Ferridan has put together with an easy comment. In just a matter of a few hours, 200 comments have been submitted. And we have another way that you can link directly to the DRBC portal in our action alert, where you can write your own comment and submit it. So there's two easy ways to do it. Please take the time to do it. It really matters. Also, comments to the DRBC commissioners themselves, and we're delivering these directly to the commissioners at their offices in the capitals, and that is for a call for the public hearing. So that is the get involved link that you see at the bottom there. When you sign up to get involved through that hearing link, you will also, if you check it off, you will be added to our list for future actions that will come up with this or other things related, such as the MAGA-FRAC attack or the next Trump EO that might drop. There might be one tomorrow we hear. So everybody, that's our last slide here, and I'll turn it over to everyone to say goodbye. But thank you all very much for joining tonight. This was a tremendous turnout and a lot of great, really informed questions. So thank you very much, everybody.